Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Good. I think I'm doing fine. So far. After I get done, I don't know. You tell me after that. You know, this past week, we had someone who came to our building and put up some signs in our yard out here. Some down at the entrance down at on the south side and some on the north side. And this was the sign. Now, we discovered that somebody had put these signs at a lot of the churches of Christ in the area. Now, I want to ask you a question. What is your first impression of seeing a sign like that out in the front? We got a thumbs up. Okay. Let me ask you this. Okay, you don't know who put it up. All you know has been put up. What questions come to your mind? Okay, what's the motive? Is it positive or negative? Right? Huh? Who did it? Okay. It wasn't anybody here. Okay. Why we didn't put them up already? Okay. All right. It is very interesting listening to you because now, how many people have a very positive reaction to the sign? Okay, how many people are kind of negative with regard to the reaction toward the sign? How many people just really aren't sure? I was talking to the young adults about this. I showed them a picture of the sign, and their initial reaction was very negative. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would they be negative with regard to this? Well, you know what they noticed immediately? What? The grammar. And when they saw the grammar, it was like, that was the first thing they noticed. The second thing was, and I don't want to be, and here's the deal. The person who put it up, their intention was very good. Their intention was very good. They were trying to give free advertising to all the churches in the area. That's what they were doing. They just never asked for permission. They never told anybody they were doing it. They just did it. If you will notice that it's not consistent with regard to the capitalization. It's not even, it's it's kind of, now I guess it's all centered is what it looks like. Visti actually means visit, but it's spelled wrong, okay? There's not a period after Mark and Luke, and then you've got a capital K instead of a small k. So those are the things that they noticed, which is interesting when you think about that, because when they notice that, it's like, I'm not that interested, okay? Now, another thing too, let's say that you are someone who is unchurched, and you see this sign out there. You don't really know anything about us. You just see the sign. What do you think your reaction might be at that point? Yes? Right. They mean nothing because you have no frame of reference. Okay? Huh?
Sure you have a frame of reference.
If you're unchurched?
This building, this church, and the people that go here.
But they don't know you. They're unchurched. They don't really know us.
Understand.
Okay?
We don't have to know somebody before we share the gospel with them.
Okay.
Since when did we have to, and I'm not trying to argue the point,
Mm-hmm.
but since then, when did we have to be a proper literary genius or whatever to tell somebody about the gospel? I would hope it would know somebody to think.
Then here's my question.
Yeah.
If I'm unchurched and I see this, what is that telling me about the gospel? Because I have no clue what the gospel is. I see these words. I see that I'm repent or perish. I don't know what ROM means or MK means. Okay? It's not that the message on the sign is a bad message. It's not that the person's motives were bad. But my question is, if you're trying to connect with somebody who doesn't know anything about you, this may not be the best way to do it. Bob?
If someone who grew up in the internet age, this looks like a spam email.
Right.
Spelling is wrong.
Correct. Okay.
It looks like spam.
It looks, okay. So I think that's a good way to describe it. It looks like spam. And I think that we have to understand where we're at. We have to understand who we're dealing with. Okay? We need to understand, if we're going to really reach out to people, we have to have a proper perspective of them. We need to understand them. And so really it's about perspective. Some people can look at this and they think, this is wonderful. This is a wonderful sign. Put it up. You can look at, other people can look at it and they say, no, this is terrible. There are others who, well, I don't really care. It is all about our perspective based upon how we grew up, what our experiences are like with churches. So let's say, for instance, it's somebody that sees a sign, but their experience with a church was a very negative experience. The sign's not going to make much difference in their life. Okay? I also asked the young adults, and maybe you could tell me, let me ask you this. If you see a sign like this and you're unchurched, do you feel like you're being invited to come to be a part of this? Not really, okay? Now, it doesn't mean the message is wrong. It doesn't mean the message is wrong, but it's not something that really invites people in, and that's one of the things that they said as well. So we did not keep the signs out in the front yard. One, we didn't know who put them out there. We didn't know what their motivation was. We didn't know if what they were saying is, well, this is Western Heights. They don't teach this, so we have to teach it to you. Or whether it was somebody was trying to help. Yes?
Again, if we were doing, and I'm as guilty as anybody, but if we were doing the job that we should be doing in evangelizing people, how many of us have shared that message right there with people on a regular basis? Many of us haven't. I haven't as regular as I should have.
Right.
There may be some people who are curious enough. Yeah, you're gonna offend some people no matter what you do. If we had every bit of that perfect from a literary standpoint, it still would offend some people.
Sure.
And I'm
Sure.
just saying that whoever put it up there, had great intentions, I think, and was,
Right, and I said that.
again,
Yeah.
maybe we should have put it up, and maybe we should have corrected the literary part and left them out there.
Well, I don't know. I think that it's very important for us to have a proper perspective of the people that we're dealing with, and that we need to help them to have a proper perspective of what we're talking about. So I'm not saying that the man had bad motives. I'm not saying that he was wrong. I'm just saying that we need to be aware. What is our perspective? Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question. When you think of people who are unchurched, what's the word that comes to your mind? How would you describe them?
Well, I think all unchurched people have a God, and with the majority of unchurched people, that God is material.
Okay. So, unchurched people, for many of them, their God is materialism. It could be something else. So they worship something. Okay. Yes.
Lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge. Okay. Lack of interest. Okay. Worldliness. Okay. Do you ever use the word lost to describe them? Okay, what do you mean by that?
They don't realize the importance of God and read the Bible and do that, then they will be going to God.
Okay, so the way that you would typically look is if they don't understand what the Bible is teaching, if they don't follow that, they're going to hell, right? The repent or perish part of it, correct? Is that how you would tend to look at it? Okay.
Lost could be someone who's not in a covenant saving relationship with Christ, with God the Father.
Okay.
We have to be careful about using it. Like Mitch was talking about this morning. There are certain things we would not say to somebody. You wouldn't walk up to somebody and say, hey, you're lost.
Okay.
But we know that according to what we
Okay.
They have Christ.
Right. Okay. So let's say that our perspective is that they are, and it's not a wrong perspective, but it's that they don't know what's true. They're not with God. They're going to hell. Okay. If you look at people as lost in that respect, that they need to be corrected or even debated, because that's what sometimes that leads us to, that idea of correction. They're wrong and condemned, okay? So it may lead us to correction and debate. We've got to prove to them that they're wrong so they will change. Now, I've known a number of people that that's how they approached it. And that's not necessarily absolutely wrong in all aspects. But I can tell you that for many people, especially today, that is not going to connect. So let's say that our perspective is different. That when we think of people who are lost, it's like what Mitch was talking about this morning, that they have gotten off they're off the trail. That we're both seeking to find our way. We're both searching. And what they need is they need to be directed back to the trail. And so if that's your perspective, then what you're doing is you're seeking to help. You are seeking to lead them, possibly. Your desire is to help them, to assist them, in a sense. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Okay. Now, these are little nuances, I guess, in all of this. And so that sign, when it's put up, what lost people might see is, these people are telling me I'm going to hell. That may be true, that that's what's happening to them. But maybe what they need is they need to know that they're loved, and we want to help you find God. We want to help you to find that relationship. And so that perspective is really, I think, really important for us. There is Henry Nouwen offered a prayer one time, and he said this. He said, God, help me to see others not as my enemies or as ungodly, but rather as thirsty people. And give me the courage and compassion to offer living water, which alone quenches deep thirst. Now, if there are ungodly people. There are. There's evil in the world. There are people who don't want to know anything about God. I understand that. There are some people who are mistaken. But when we see them as an enemy, when we see them simply as ungodly people, then sometimes we may miss something in the connection with them. Help me to see them as people who have a thirst. And give me the courage and compassion to reach out. And it does take courage and compassion. There was a rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, who was the chief rabbi in Great Britain at one time. I didn't even know Great Britain had a chief rabbi. And I don't even know when this was, but he said this. He said, the supreme religious challenge is to see God's image in one who is not our image. Now, I don't know if that's really the supreme religious challenge or not, but I think the point is, what he's making is that a lot of times what we do is if there's somebody who's not like us, we don't have any interest in them because we want them to look just like us. The reality is we really want them to look just like Jesus. But if we realize and remember that everyone, no matter what situation they're in, they've been created in God's image, then does that not cause us or encourage us to want to connect with them in such a way so that we can help them to see who they should be in Christ? Because if it's about debate or corrections, a lot of times it's about who's going to win the argument. And if you get into an argument, nobody's going to win. We've been through that. And so it's not that we don't talk to people and help them to learn what they haven't learned. And it's not that we don't teach them what God wants. It's that our perspective of them needs to be such that we're able to connect with them in a different way than we have in the past. Yes, did you have something?
I was going to say, somewhere along the way, you have to, you don't tell people they're lost, but you have to, in order for them to want what you have, they have to know that they have a need for it.
Yeah,
And
right.
there has to be a good way to
come to realization sooner or later.
Sure they do.
We can do that in a kind way.
Mm-hmm.
But the scriptures point that out over and over again, and I think God's given us every, to me today, I mean, I know things change, but people have always been people.
Mhm.
Same with the day of Pentecost. There were a lot of educated people there. There were some not educated people.
Right.
Yet Peter stood up and said, hey, he didn't hold back any punches. I'm not saying that's the way we should do it, but he lovingly said to them, hey, you crucified the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
You need to, and they were pricked in their hearts with that. There's nothing that touches us like the gospel of Christ.
Right.
I'm just saying that people are the same today than we're.
And they are. They are.
We've got to our norms and the traditions and things that go on in our time that are different, but by and large, we're still the men and women that we were in creation.
Correct. But it really is about relationship. And if you don't have a relationship, it makes it so much harder to connect and so much harder to actually confront them when you need to talk about a change that needs to occur. And if we're unwilling or unable to build those relationships, then that makes it more difficult to communicate that message. So I think if you take these things into consideration, these two comments, that helps us with perspective. Perspective, I think, is extremely important, as I've said already. So let me ask you this. Let me bring this up first. In Matthew 7, Jesus gives us a golden rule. So in everything, do it to others, what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Okay? So basically what that means is put yourself in someone else's shoes. I mean, when they are, if you were that person right there, how would you want to be treated in that situation? So let me ask you this. Let's say that you're unchurched. You really haven't either had a very good experience with church before, or you just don't know anything about it. You don't know really much about Jesus. How would you want to be approached?
I'd want to be approached kind of the way that I look at it, and the way I would want to look at it if I was on the other side. If somebody came up to me, I would want to see somebody that would approach me that has been where I've been, that understands where I'm from,
Mm-hmm.
and that is most effective in my opinion.
Okay. So for you, it's somebody who connects with you in such a way that they understand what you've been through. They've had some similar experiences. Okay. And we've seen that work in people's
if
lives.
I know I'm lost,
Mm-hmm.
then, and I know I was, then I can't go beat somebody over the head with it when I was there too. I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want, I'd want somebody that can sympathize with me.
Okay, but when you say that, are you saying that you want them to sympathize with you up to a point, or
They've got to hear the truth, but I would
okay.
want love and compassion.
right?
And
Okay,
understanding,
okay. So he's saying that he would want somebody to understand where he's coming from, who's maybe been in a similar situation, so that as they share with me the truth and they show me that love and understanding and sympathy, they also get to a place, because maybe of trust that's built up in the relationship, where you can confront them, you can talk to them about what you need to talk about.
Well, we were all lost. And if we
Oh,
keep
sure.
That in our, if we keep
Yeah.
that in our mind, at some point we all should have been in their shoes. Or
Right.
were in their shoes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, if we think we've always had it all together, then we're wrong. If we think we got it all together right now, we're probably wrong, right? So we still struggle. We should be able to relate to the difficulties that other people have, and maybe you don't understand exactly where they're at, but you can try. You can listen. And a lot of people just need somebody to listen to them. And when they have somebody listening to them, sometimes they're more willing to listen to you as a result.
One good way, Rusty, I think maybe approach something like that is, we're all lost
Yeah,
without Christ. We're
correct.
all in that same boat.
Mhm.
The only thing that makes a difference, I remember I used to go to church at Clifton Creek, and I'd go by the golf course Sunday morning. There were those guys out there playing golf. And I don't know, maybe some of them went to a very early service. I'm not.
Well, they took communion on the third tee, I think, yeah.
On the third drink.
Okay.
But yeah, I used to think, those people out there are no different from me
Yeah,
as far as their probably their morality, their obeying the law, those things, being kind to their neighbor. covenant relationship with Christ Jesus
Right.
that not only washes away our sin, but continually washes our sins away every time that we're walking in the light.
Yeah.
Which is in the Greek means having regard for righteousness. So that's the only difference.
Right.
That's something we can point out to people.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, like you said before, they think we're saying that we're some way better than they are because
Well, when you talk like that, what you hear is that you have common ground with those guys. And what we have a tendency to do is we tend to look at the things that are not common. Now, we need to be aware of those, but often we fail to see what the common ground is. And the common ground is extremely important when you're trying to connect with people. So, which is good that you brought that up. Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 9. He says, though I am free. Now, he was talking about this after talking about the freedom that he had in Christ as an apostle and as a Christian. He says, though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. What's his point? What's Paul's point here?
pretty much whatever it takes. That's what
Whatever it takes.
Not be puffed up.
Okay. Not to be puffed up. Find the common ground. Walt?
The earlier question is, could you confront them or another way? And you keep saying the other way, get to know them.
Yeah. Well, what he does is he understands where they're coming from. Because the thing is, when you understand where somebody's coming from, then it helps you to know what you should and shouldn't say. Now, you may not always get it right. Paul still made people mad. People got upset with him. But this concept, this idea, is about changing a perspective on how we look at those who are lost. That we try to see things from their perspective so that we know what to say, what will connect with them. Yes?
I think also, Rusty, that a good way maybe to approach this whole thing is not to approach somebody on a necessarily an individual claim, me, you, whatever, but from the standpoint that the Bible presents it in that all men have fallen short. God's relationship with man from the very beginning has been what? To bring him back to God. And when you start talking those broad concepts, not on the individual basis where they may feel like they're being individually targeted, but rather you're talking about the whole scope of God's plan, and it was to bring back man from his sinfulness. And I don't think there's anybody that you can talk to that wouldn't admit that we've got that.
Right.
But we've got to have some way to get rid of it, and this is the way God does that. And start with that.
Yeah.
In other words, use broad concepts rather than those individual things that we're tempted to use sometimes.
Right. So Ray's saying that what might be good is for us to talk with broad concepts about how all of us need this. That all of us are lost. All of us have failed. And God is trying to bring all of us back to Him. And I think that that's true, that we need to have that idea available as well. But sometimes you've got to talk about the individual, but you can't talk about the individual without the relationship. That makes it very difficult. You can talk about it, but they're going to listen to you a whole lot better if you have got that relationship with them and you've actually tried to see things from their perspective. So Paul says this to us. He says, this is what he's doing. It might be good for us to follow that example. And then we have an example of him actually doing that. In Acts 17, Paul is in Athens, and he is speaking to all of these philosophers. And while he is in Athens with all of these men who love to talk about all kinds of philosophy and stuff all day long, it says, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus, and he said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Now what you worship as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. So what he does is he begins by saying, you know what, you guys are religious. Well, Paul's religious. And so he's got that common ground. Now, of course, this is just a small example of that. But what he does, he goes into explaining to them who Jesus is. He talks about the resurrection. And there are people who are there who have no need for Paul. They really have no interest in what he has to say. There are others who want him to come back and talk some more. And there are others who decide that they are beginning to believe. And so in this encounter where Paul tries to create that common ground and tries to see things from their perspective, he knows that they're religious, that they're trying to worship all these gods. He wants to help them to understand who they've missed and to explain it to them. And there are some who believe as a result. Another example, is just a little bit different. This isn't Paul, this is Jesus. Jesus in John 4 meets the Samaritan woman. So he's going through Samaria. He stops at a town by a well. It says now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground where Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour, so it was around noon. When the Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food, so Jesus was there by himself. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Now, if you know the story, what happens is this conversation gets started by a question, "Can you give me a drink of water?" And then Jesus begins to proceed to tell her about living water. And she realizes that he's the Messiah. Now, the thing about this is this woman's out there in the middle of the day. Now, we don't know exactly why she's there in the middle of the day, but it's very likely that she's there because she can't really go when all the other women go. Most of the women would go in the morning or in the evening when it's cooler to get water. But she goes by herself. And then this man talks to her, who's a Jew, who's not supposed to talk to her. Now, she goes by herself, and that means that it's very likely that she's not very well respected in her community. And when you begin to learn about her life, you can see that it's very possible that that's the truth. That's what's going on. But Jesus talks to her. He just asked her for a drink of water. And after this conversation, what does she do? She discovers that he is the Messiah. She goes and tells the community, who many of them probably don't respect her very much, but she tells the community about him, and they all come out, and many of them believe as a result. So God has led his son to this spot in the middle of the day at the right time for this woman to come out. And what Jesus does is he makes the most of the opportunity, but he just does it by asking for a drink. He doesn't ever say she's sinful. He doesn't condemn her. Now, maybe they have another conversation after. Maybe they talk some more, and he tries to help her with that. But he begins the relationship. So we look at that, and we see these types of things, and we think, you know, maybe those little conversations can start bigger ones, right? I was at a youth ministry conference in January with Adam, and Rick Atchley was speaking. I don't know if you know who Rick Atchley is. Many of you might. He's a preacher at the Hills. And he was telling this story, and I cannot remember if it was a story about him or if he was telling a story about another minister. Adam and I talked about it later on, just this week actually, and he said, well, I thought he was telling about himself. And I thought, well, I thought he was telling about somebody else. But it really doesn't matter. I'm getting off on a side street here, okay? So forgive me. So I'm going to tell it like it's Rick's story, if you're okay with that. He had spoken at a conference, and he was heading home. He got on the airplane. He had a middle seat. That's what he was assigned, a middle seat in the row. Now, he didn't really want to talk to people very much. He wanted to just rest, maybe listen to some music, maybe listen to a podcast or something, but just kind of take it easy. Yeah, chill, right? Okay. I don't even know if they say chill anymore or not. When I was a youth minister, sometimes I knew those words, what words were appropriate. Now I don't know what it is anymore. So he sits down, he gets comfortable as you can get in the plane. And this little girl comes and sits by the window. Now, she's traveling by herself. She's very young. The flight attendant brings her over there. She's got Down syndrome. And she sits next to Rick by the window. And so they're sitting there, and she hits him on the leg. And she said, "Mister, what's your name?" And he says, "My name's Rick." And he asked her name. And she said, "Do you like ice cream?" He goes, "Oh, I love ice cream." Yeah. And then she proceeds to ask several other questions, and he answers all the questions. And then she finally gets to the question, "Do you love Jesus?" He goes, "Oh, yes, I love Jesus." And so they sit there, and finally another man comes and sits on the other side of Rick. And this is a businessman. Looks like he's very busy, just wants to keep to himself, pulls out all of his stuff and starts working on things. And so Rick really has no intention of talking to the man, but the little girl hits his leg again. She goes, "Ask him his name." He said, "I think he's busy right now. I don't think that he really wants to be, but ask him his name." Okay. She would like to know what your name is, so the man tells him his name. "Ask him if he likes ice cream." So he says, "She'd like to know if you like ice cream." And yeah. And then she starts going down her list, and Rick suddenly realizes, I know where this is going. I know where this is headed. She's finally asked, she says, "Ask him if he loves Jesus." He goes, I think he's really busy. He doesn't want to be bothered anymore. "Ask him if he loves Jesus." So Rick says, she wants to know if you love Jesus. And at that point, the man stops what he's doing. He sets his stuff down, and he almost starts to break down. And he begins to talk to Rick about the struggles he's having in his life with his family and about the faith that he's struggled with for quite some time. And so what happens is Rick is able to have this faith conversation with this man who he's never met before, that he wouldn't have had if it was up to him, because of a little girl. A little child, yeah. And so, but I'm willing to bet that if Rick would have asked him all those questions on his own, the man would have thought he was nuts, right? But this little girl changed the context. And what happened was God was leading Rick to have a conversation with this man, and he used this child to do it. And what we have to do, I think, is to be open enough to follow where God is leading. So God used this little girl to open up a door. You know, Paul found common ground with a bunch of pagans and was able to lead some of them to Jesus. Jesus was able to start a conversation by asking a question of this woman who had been rejected, by just asking her for a drink of water, and as a result, a whole town heard about Jesus, and many of them believed. And this little girl provided an opportunity for Rick to share his faith with a man who needed it. I think that it's important for us to be attentive enough to others and their needs, and our perspectives of others should be such that we are willing to talk with them rather than to debate or simply ignore them. And so we've got to understand where they're coming from. It's important for us to do that, because if we mess it up, we might not have another chance. Now, I'm not saying that we have to be perfect. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to always get it right. And God can do a whole lot more than we can do by ourselves. But it's so important for us to see things from others' perspective so that we know where they're coming from. May our eyes and ears and hearts be open to God's leading. So how do we see the lost? Maybe the way that we need to see the lost is not by seeing them as enemies or ungodly, but rather as people who have been created in God's image who may just be off track. And maybe we need to come alongside of them and assist them to the right trail. It won't always work. And sometimes they still may not like you for it. But if that's our attitude, I know that definitely when we do it that way, we're showing the love of God. If there's any way that we can help you tonight to get on that right track, or just to pray together as we seek to do God's will, we ask you to come as we stand and sing.